Do you ever find your autistic partner, spouse, or loved one challenging at times? Do you ever feel confused about why they do certain things? Maybe you want to improve your relationship, but you aren't exactly sure how or where to start. I was in this exact same position before my husband was diagnosed with autism in early 2023. Since then, I've learned a lot about ways to make a relationship happier and healthier. In this video, I'll be sharing 5 game-changing adjustments I've made since Chris's autism diagnosis, trying to adjust some of my habits that were causing issues. So something that I learned was how impactful a schedule and sleep were to Chris's routines. So something that I did to adapt my schedule to better fit his needs is to be able to try to readjust a lot of our meetings or appointments so they weren't very early in the morning and disruptive to Chris's sleep. Because the night before, he would have a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep because it was like he was mentally preparing for an alarm to go off early in the morning. This also is helpful to be able to keep consistent routines and to be able to provide more predictability in our lives. So trying to make adjustments to habits that were impacting Chris. One of the things that was impacting Chris was my understanding of eating and eating routines together. So I grew up in a family where meal times and eating schedules were very structured. We had 3 meals at specific times of the day, and pretty much every day we ate at those exact same times. But Chris's instincts are a lot less structured. He eats when he feels hungry, but he also sometimes struggles with interoception, which means he struggles with noticing body cues of hunger or thirst or other body signs. And so sometimes he doesn't really notice when he is hungry. So it's a balance of being able to figure out what are our habits for eating, sometimes checking in with him, but also being okay with us not always eating at the same exact time and also not eating the same thing. Chris gets to choose what he's going to eat. I'm going to have what I'm going to eat. That's okay. So figuring out how to make things work for us. But these were different habits than the ones that I grew up with and adjustments that did take a little bit of time for both of us. Another example of a habit that I've adjusted is the types of TV shows that we watch together. So I really like crime shows or dramas, like Law and Order is my all-time favorite show. And for years, Chris would sit and watch them with me because we took turns choosing what we were going to watch. But later I realized that a lot of times those shows were too stimulating and they would cause disruptions to his sleep or he would have bad dreams after them. So one of the adjustments that we made is I watch my shows earlier in the day or I watch them when he's just not around. And that way he doesn't have impacts on his sleep, which impact our next day. So it's a habit that really helps both of us out. Another adjustment that we've made is carving out more time to be together where it's actually focused on what we're doing together. So, for example, as I was growing up, I was always busy with things, like running around to a bunch of different things. My parents were split sometimes with me and my younger brother. That seems to be a lot of times the standard of success in the West, is to feel a little bit rushed, always busy, and always on the move. But this doesn't give us a good chance to be able to relax and spend quality time together. So really slowing things down and actually eliminating a lot of the excess things that we would overschedule before Chris's diagnosis has really helped too. Another thing that I've done is be more aware of myself and help Chris be more self-aware too. So what I mean by this is being aware of the things that I do that sometimes will bother him and trying to make some adjustments, even if I didn't mean to bother him. So an example of this is not scaring Chris. So I used to walk into a room and sometimes hug him from behind or just start talking, and he didn't even know I was actually there. So sometimes he would get really startled, I would make him jump, and then he would get irritated or mad because I scared him and I startled him. And he would say, "Why did you scare me like that? You know I don't like to be scared like that." And I would be like, "But I was talking and I made a lot of noise and I thought you could hear me coming." And he'd be like, "No, like I had no idea you were there." So this would be really jarring to Chris and make him feel really like tense even in his home space, which is supposed to be his safe space. But in my mind, I actually thought I was pretty loud when I was coming in to a room, but he just was absorbed in his own thoughts and he didn't hear anything. I've tried to make adjustments with this. So if I know I'm going to be going into a spot and he might be in thought, I first of all try to do it gently, but at the same time, make enough noise so that he knows I'm there, but not enough that it's disruptive or irritating to him. So it also goes both ways. Now he knows that I'll almost never purposely try to scare him, but he also knows that when I say, "I actually made some noise as I came into the room," he'll be like, "Oh, I just must not have heard you." It's a way that we can work together and accommodate one another too. Another thing that I mean by being more self-aware is noticing when Chris is zoning out or thinking or absorbed in his own world and his own thoughts. He gets a look on his face. It's kind of like if you've seen the movie A Christmas Story, he reminds me of Ralphie, where Ralphie like zooms into his other world and he's thinking about all of his dramatic adventures. Chris kind of gets that look on his face, especially when he's thinking of an amazing idea. But previously, I didn't really notice when he was zoning out. I would just start talking or doing something that broke his train of thought. So now I try to notice when he is in his zone, and instead of breaking it, I try to just kind of observe when he's done before I jump in, which is another adjustment that has helped a lot with both of us. So going along with that, just understanding that autistic people might shut down due to overstimulation, or they just zone out because they have really vibrant inner worlds a lot of the times, or just lots of busy thoughts going on in their brains. Understanding this is helpful because then you'll know too that when you interrupt them, it's probably going to be frustrating for them. And then you can understand why. You kind of just jolted them back into reality, and that can also physically cause a little bit of discomfort too. So just be mindful of that. Being mindful of energy levels. So some things are easy for us both and things are going great. We're both getting a lot of good sleep. I can handle making a lot of adjustments and Chris is patient when I forget to do something a certain way. Other times it's not so easy. Like Chris isn't sleeping well, so his patience levels are low. He's way more sensitive to certain stimuli, so small noises that he might not have even noticed in the past are suddenly jolting and you can physically see him tensing up sometimes. And he's just drained because the world is exhausting for him, especially at those times. So something to be aware of is just how our energy levels are at particular times. So an adjustment that we make with that sometimes is if we're out and about and we can see that Chris is getting really drained or he had appointments and he feels stressed out, it might be a good time just to go home and reset if we're able to do that. Or if we have other things planned for the day and we already did something earlier, it might be time to also just readjust those plans and move them to another time. So just being aware of where both of us are at certain times is what's really helpful in being able to make adjustments and being flexible with what both of our needs are. Less traditional approaches to things. So this is kind of an extension to being flexible, but having flexibility, for example, with different meals, with meetups with friends and family, having things happen in our safe spot, which is a lot of times our home, but not inviting people in unexpectedly. Things like date nights might be things where they're less traditional, so sharing time with his special interests, like boxing, or he was enjoying woodworking before, or time out in nature with a hike. All of these things are ways that we're able to incorporate our interests into ways that are manageable for both of us, but things that might be a little bit less traditional. Consistency and structure. One of the key attributes of autism is wanting to stick to a routine and repetition. So keeping consistency with our physical spaces and things is really important for Chris. So keeping things in the same spot, for example, like silverware always goes in the same exact spot to the little tray organizer inside of our drawers. Keeping things consistent for his spaces, like his bedside table or the spots where he organizes things or his office. Even if I don't see the purpose of why he keeps things in a specific spot, he has a reason for it. Putting things away in closets in the same exact order as often as possible as I could, or at least stacking them in the way that Chris has them stacked too. So all of this also applies to routines of how we do things. So Chris likes to take the same route to go to the grocery store or to other familiar places, whereas I, a lot of times, like to try changing things up. But he prefers to stick to the same routes and routines, or going through the same routines on days where we have appointments. So for example, going to the dentist is really stressful for Chris, even though he has an awesome dentist. He just knows it's going to be a sensory overload. There's going to be a hard time getting there. If it's early in the day, he usually doesn't sleep well the night before, and then there's everything else involved with going to the dentist. So a lot of times it's basically a whole day event, especially if it's a period of autistic burnout. So it can help him a lot to go through the plan for the day and let him know what to expect. If it's a day when he's going to have an appointment, we can go over the whole plan ahead of time, even including like what he's going to eat, what time we're going to leave the house, everything, so that he knows and he's reassured that it should go mostly the way that he plans. So we even will plan what kinds of snacks to bring along for him to munch on if he wants to have that instead of going somewhere afterwards. He usually wants to go straight home. So this is really important with going along with maintaining routines and structure with repetition. It just gives more rest for busy brains and more predictability in a world that's really overwhelming a lot of times and unpredictable for autistics. Practice empathy. So I realize the world is challenging for Chris and also for other autistic people, far more so than for myself. So people have said to me, it seems like you really do so much. But my response would be, yes, I try to do a lot, but so does Chris. And isn't that what it means to care about somebody else? So I do a lot for my colleagues when I can. It's part of being empathetic, which lots of people talk about, but they have to remember actions are a lot more important than just what you say. So if I can show that I'm trying to support Chris, he really does feel a lot more supported and can be more comfortable with all of those other challenges of daily life and those things that come up because he's autistic, including the ones that really aren't hard for me, but they're complete torture for Chris. So an example is our vacation spots. So sometimes planning for a longer trip due to the stress of travel. So instead of bouncing around to a lot of different places within a specific country that we're visiting, we might choose one place and spend a lot of time there so that way we have time to be able to explore it thoroughly, but also have one bed to adjust to, a certain set of pillows, and everything can be much smoother for us because we make adjustments with what we both need. Another thing we do is we work a lot together in terms of figuring out places that meet Chris's needs. So especially weather and quiet places are really important. And it's okay for me because places that work for him will almost always work for me. Chris is also very empathetic when I'm clear with things. So Chris might not always pick up on things when I'm not direct, but he does make adjustments regularly when I need him to. But it becomes a lot easier for him to notice and to do these things when he also knows I'm working to understand and empathize with him as well. And one last thing to remember is not taking things personally. So being open to honesty and also being open to the autistic person unmasking means being open to hearing things in a way that might not be phrased in the most eloquent way possible, but could be very concise and direct in just what Chris needs to say. So a lot of times autistic people are not necessarily focused on how they are saying things, the delivery, because they're struggling with a lot of communication challenges as it is. So just being flexible and understanding that most of the time things are not personal. And if I'm not judging things, it makes our communication so much easier. So what are some of the adjustments that you've made to improve your relationship with someone autistic? Or if you're autistic, what are some of the challenges you face in your relationships? And for everyone, what are some of the things you're going to try that you learned from this video? Drop your questions or thoughts in the comments below. I learned so much from all of them, and I really appreciate you all being here. Thanks for watching. Chris would watch them with me because we took turns. I feel stressed.